Does it make sense for a migration to Drupal CMS?
No. No. What you would do is, because it's just Drupal. So if you're on Drupal 10, there might be some things that aren't, because Drupal CMS is built on Drupal 11, but what you can do is just add the functionality that's in Drupal CMS to your existing site. Because Drupal CMS itself, once you've installed it, it's just a Drupal site. So there's nothing really that makes it any different. So migrating doesn't really mean anything. And because we developed it so that the recipes are all separate, and that was actually really kind of complicated and adds a lot more overhead, but essentially all of the recipes that are included in Drupal CMS can be applied to any site. Mostly they would be compatible with Drupal 10, so say there's an admin UI recipe, you could apply that to your existing site, you would get Gin, you would get navigation, you would get all of the things that the admin UI provides, and you can do that on your existing site. So that would be the closest thing to migrating, because migrating is not really possible. You would just apply the functionality to your existing site.
In the installer, sorry.
That's okay.
In the installer, you have given various options. Do we have a multi-select there?
Multi-site? No, it's just.
No, not multi-site. Oh. Multi-select. Like
yes. Yeah.
Repeat the question.
So I'll just go back and show the slide. In the installer, it presents you with some content types, and yes, that's multi-select. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for all this work already, like the privacy tools that you showed. Like we went through this with our agency embedding different modules. You still somehow found a different module.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Thank you for doing that work. So a couple of quick questions. So this is still free and open source, is that right?
Oh yes, it's all open source. Yes.
And then it sounds like it's also like you install it and you use it, and then it's not like you are staying on the Drupal CMS path, and then 2.0 comes up, you upgrade to 2.0. It's more of a one-time get going. So if I started Drupal CMS now and like Experience Builder comes out in 2.0, I'm not able to like upgrade my site to use Experience Builder.
So the question is around the upgrade path from 1.0 to 2.0. It's true that there's no upgrade path per se, because it is a starter. It's a starting point. However, once Experience Builder comes out, you can add Experience Builder to your Drupal CMS site, just like you would any other Drupal site. So any content module, any functionality that exists in Drupal, you can add to a Drupal CMS site. And so every time we do a release, if we add new features or we fix a bug, we publish a change record that documents what you would have to do. So like, for example, there was a bug in version 1.0 that the description tag on the homepage, the token was wrong. So if you've already installed, you're not going to get that fixed, but there's a change record that shows you exactly how to fix it. So there is a little bit of sort of following along, but the benefit of that is that there's no lock-in. So it's like the old distribution model, but you're not locked in and you don't have to be tied to that forever. You can kind of go your own way. Thank you.
Yeah, there was one here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So back in the Drupal 8 and 9 days, there was a lot of work with moving a lot of modules into core. Like I remember, boy, media. That was a good time. But it sounds like a lot of these component parts to Drupal CMS are still technically contrib modules. They're not part of core. And so does that mean that is that selection of modules can we expect there to be like more support and resources behind these sort of like, they feel like they're blessed in a way, they're not exactly core?
Something maybe like golden contrib or something? Yeah.
Sure. Is there sort of like, not a technical tier system, but sort of culturally, that there's going to be like this set of modules that is going to be like more popular and more supported than other options that would exist?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to summarize that. It's like they're going to be like a golden tier for contrib modules. Basically, so first of all, Drupal core doesn't pretend to get all the modules that are going to be on CMS and put them inside Drupal core. Core, its goal is going to be to support distributions, or not distributions, that's the way that we thought about that.
The things formerly known as distributions.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we want to make sure that Drupal core is going to support all these things, but we're not going to put all these modules into Drupal core. But from the Drupal CMS side of things, we are making sure that we coordinate with all the module maintainers to make sure that they are compatible with the later release. We are making sure that we test all the country modules that we add with the rest of the things that we're shipping with. So we are kind of providing this tested and supported by Drupal CMS. So we are making sure, for example, that every module that we put on, it has an active maintainer, or at least one, but ideally more than one, and especially if they are strategic modules or themes, we want to make sure that there are several of them. So we're kind of like making already this kind of governance or support work. So I'm not sure how much we can talk about like a golden tire.
Yeah.
But it's like we're making sure that what ships with Drupal
it's-
CMS, it's supported.
It's still contrib though, and it's not, I mean, there's no way that we as a leadership team of like 5 people could take on, like, we guarantee that all of these modules will forever be supported. But I think it's more a case of like, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, because it's highly unlikely that a module that's used by hundreds of thousands of sites, even if the maintainer steps down, that everyone will go, well, that's that, I guess. You know, somebody will step in to take that on, and whether we as the Drupal CMS team can facilitate that better, or maybe provide visibility and try to get some funding, that remains to be seen. But for now, it's sort of like no change, really. Yeah, officially.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly.
One more question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. At the beginning, you mentioned this sector or segment of 25K to 100,000 or 100,000K. And I'm just curious, or 100K. I'm curious how that was identified, what research went into it, and does that represent a fairly significant kind of segment or portion of sites that are built, and that's why it was chosen? Like, why was that specifically chosen between 25K and 100K?
So basically, the research that went into that was like, who was actually going to try to, so as I was saying, that part of the research was mostly provided by the Experience Builder team, the Acquia team that worked on doing all the research on which market spaces were going to be more useful for who would be more interested in using Experience Builder itself. So they did all the research that was identifying the different markets. Can go back to that slide if it's necessary.
And I assume it's in that PDF that's...
Yeah, so this is
in the
yeah,
strategy.
exactly. So this is the result, but this is not coming out of nowhere. This is actually coming from all this research that was identifying the price sensitivity, the security needs. So like it identified the different needs of the different spaces. So if you go way higher on the budget size, you're going to have a completely different needs, and you're going to have a completely different resources to solve the things. So we were trying to target these agencies that they don't have the resources to completely customize things or to invest this initial time. And we want to make sure that whoever goes and tries Drupal for the first time don't have to have the knowledge to make all the installs. So
I think it's also it's a space that Drupal used to compete in a lot, and we've kind of lost it. So it's sort of to try to pivot back to that, because in the Drupal 6, Drupal 7 days, that was the bread and butter. And then 8, it just kind of got more and more expensive, and so it's sort of an opportunity to reset a little bit.
I guess more specifically, was the data that went into that coming from like agencies or from customers or from, like what was the input data? That's kind of what
Yeah, no, definitely agencies and customers, definitely. And also just research on, looking at lists of web projects in Europe. I think there was one, I forget the website, but it was like a list of all of the projects that an agency did, and all of the ones that were within that range were WordPress, and then the Drupal ones were only above that. And I mean, I know from my own experience too, like we never do a project for under 100K. That's not great, so yeah.
Okay. I think we are at time, so thank you very, very much. Now we're going to shift over to Emma, who's going to talk about user experience process that went into this. Thank you.
I think, let's see. Oh, hang on, concurrent slide. Wait, I should check. I think I might be alright. I can always.
HDMI's over there.
Cool. I just hope all the notifications are off, but we'll see. Okay, where are you? Why do I not see it?
It's not mirroring.
No.
Try unplugging and see if there's a setting to change. There we go.
Okay. Just took a movement. Okay. Who knew? Will I just get going?
All right, folks. Hey folks, we're going to go ahead and get started again with Emma's presentation.
Hi everyone, can you all hear me okay? Good. So I'm Emma Horrell. I'm the newly appointed UX research lead for Drupal CMS. This is my first non-profit summit, my first DrupalCon North America, so it's all happening for me. My day job, thank you. My day job, I work for the University of Edinburgh, so I have a whole, my head thinks it's another time, but we're all good. So thank you for having me. Today I'm going to talk about the user experience work for Drupal CMS and the work we've been doing to try and make sure it's as user-centered as it can be for that target audience that was identified. And I'm going to do this, I've structured my session into sort of two parts. I'm going to talk a bit about me and my experience of Drupal and UX, so you know kind of who I am, where I'm coming from. I'm going to spend a few slides just thinking about what good UX is and like what we're aiming for when we talk about a good user experience, and then I'm going to apply that to Drupal CMS and do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the approaches to like making sure that user experience is there. And I'm going to hang this off of kind of three categories: learn, build, and measure. This is one of my favorite sequences to talk through things to do with UX. So you learn, you make some learnings, you do some research to understand what kind of experience you're aiming for. You then put that into a build. That then gives you something to measure to fold back learnings and make it even better. All right, so as I said, I'm the newly appointed UX research lead for Drupal CMS. Prior to that, I was on the Starshot Advisory Council, so I feel like I was one of those people that heard about it in Portland, watching the YouTube video from the Dries Note and thinking, yes, like really this is what we want. Because my day job at the University of Edinburgh, I have a very small team and there is a lot more UX to do in the university for all the digital products and services that we offer than my team can possibly manage. So having something that would make content creation and publication easier was something that was really valuable to me. Touching on some things that Johanna mentioned earlier on in the higher education space, it can be quite a lonely place to do user experience and to do web publishing. And in my role, I found it really helpful. I have set up a community of practice to help me learn from others. So I'm very community focused and learning from other people, and that's kind of what led me to Drupal. That and the fact that the university that I work for, we use Drupal 10. We had a migration from Drupal 7, which we completed in January. Thank you.
Sliding to the finish line.
We did it! We have the paragraphs editorial interface. We use the Gin admin theme. Pantheon is our host. And critically for CMS, and why this is important to me personally, is that we have non-technical content editors that edit our website. They create our web pages that the university puts out there. So the user experiences I work with in my day job focus on the end user, so what people see on the university website. So students come to our website and they want to know how they get careers help. So they look at the web pages to do that. People want to discover the research that we do at the university. We're a very research-led organization, so that's something that's really important to be represented on our webpage. But actually the user experience that underpins that and powers that is how those editors, those non-technical people, can actually use our Drupal instance to publish web pages. So I spend a lot of time focusing on how the university staff distributed across the organization can use our Drupal instance. So I spend a lot of time watching people interact with interfaces and watching where they click and what they're talking about. And going back to my point about there's more UX work, user experience work at the university than I and my team can possibly manage, I try and upskill people a little bit in understanding what UX is and why it's worth doing and how content design can be important. So I'm going to bring in some of those tools into my talk today, and also in my breakout session a bit later on if you're interested. A little bit more about me, my Drupal learning curve. So learning about Drupal for the first time when I started my role, I appreciated how I could do my job better doing user experience if I could understand more about Drupal, because this is what our staff were using. So, you know, like my competency and confidence curve looked a bit like this. I started learning about Drupal, watching people, as I said, use the editorial interface. And I was like, yeah, this is fine. I'm getting really confident and know all about Drupal. Yeah, it's cool. And then I got involved with the community, and then I realized, okay, maybe I don't know so much about this. I got introduced to Suzanne Dergacheva, and she was doing an initiative for Promote Drupal at the time to restructure the Drupal.org website. So I got involved in that, and I was like, oh, okay, there's a lot more to this. And then off the back of that, and actually this t-shirt from DrupalCon Lille represents where I realized, okay, I need to up my game, because I got involved working with Christina, looking at the restructuring of the admin UI, and understanding the terminology was not making sense to people, that they were trying to understand what to do, and that led to an issue called Drupalisms, and that, like, yeah, had a dip there. And then kind of, and Drupal CMS came along, and I was involved in that from the front foot, which I'm going up there. I'm going to talk a little bit about these pieces of work before we get into Drupal CMS, because I think it's important background. So yeah, working on like internally, I guess, thinking about how can I learn more about Drupal, how can that make me do my job at the university better. I wanted to learn about paragraphs, and we were switching from kind of a copy and paste, like you can see there, Drupal 7 on the whatever, that side, and then thinking about moving to paragraphs and trying to convince our content creators why they needed to work differently was a learning point for me, and understanding the value of working with paragraphs and kind of communicating that and upskilling it to that non-skilled audience. The Drupal.org restructure, as I said, I worked on putting together a sitemap and working out, so that helped me understand the audiences that are coming to Drupal. So not just people like us at the university that use Drupal, but also people that might be curious about Drupal, and also, of course, the development community looking to come, developer community coming to Drupal.org to find what they needed. So I did a series of like information retrieval tests to work out how people navigated Drupal, what they were curious about. And Drupalisms, that's not done. That's just started. This is an issue which was about clarifying Drupal terminology. So we learned through the back of a card sort that Christina did to look at the admin UI that there were a lot of terms in the interface, in the admin UI, that didn't really make sense to people, or people thought they meant something different. And so we began an issue, me working with several others, to look at Drupal language and to think about how we could make that more controlled. So we're working towards a controlled vocabulary, and we set out 6 stages to do that. And what I'm learning from that is even more about how Drupal works and how important some of the design decisions from the past are about making sense of how Drupal works. Because if you set out to change it or improve it, you have to kind of understand why those decisions were made in the first place. The other thing that I'm learning from working on this issue is some objective ways to analyze complexities. So thinking about the opinions that exist about how Drupal is put together, that's all valuable, but when it comes to trying to make an objective look and to prioritize how you change language, you have to try and take an objective look, which is really difficult to do. But we're a small team working on this. I've neglected this issue for a bit, I'm not going to lie, but it's still very close to my heart to try and improve this and just kind of open up the terminology to people who are new to Drupal. Cool. Okay, so then Drupal CMS came along from 2024. I was involved in working on defining the personas and the archetypes. I'm going to talk about all of these in a bit more detail, but this just gives you a flavor and an overview. Talking about benchmarking, working out where this sat in the world, and what else was out there for people who were wanting to build websites and publish content, the content modeling, and then getting into some of the UX research for some of the newer stuff, like the AI features, but also making sure the fundamentals, we're doing the right job. I'm going to talk about all of these in a sec. And what this is, for me personally, learning, this is helping me to learn a lot more about how people want to build websites, what those motivations are, how they naturally want to approach that, and the ways, like the opportunities, the ways that Drupal can help them do that. So I'm going to segue slightly into what good UX looks like. This is something I deal with a lot in my role. And typically, people talk about UX, they usually have an interface in mind. So they've tried to do something using an interface like one of these, and they've got stuck. So there's a perception that UX is all about interfaces. And to a certain extent, that's correct, because this is where the issues happen. So I watch people trying to add, like in a usability test, can you upload this picture for me? And let me see how you do that. And I've watched people look at these fields and go, nah, can't see image, can't see picture, can't work it out. So your temptation is to go, right, there's a big flashing light for this is where it is, just that's where the images are. Change that button, and then we're done. Okay, we've improved the UX because we've changed the interface, tick. Not really, because you can improve it for somebody, but you can then create something else alongside. So there's more to it, and that can be annoying, really, because sometimes you just want to fix these things, but it's the way it is. Because UX depends on multiple factors. So you've got whoever your user is bringing to the table, their language, their ways of working, the tasks, and then what you're presenting with them. And that is all underpinned by the structure, the content model. The user interface is one part of it. Naming conventions is something else. But you can only control some of those. So for us at Drupal, with CMS, we can only control the bottom layer. If we set out to reach a target audience, the way that they think about things and approach tasks, we kind of have to take that and then adapt to it. And so for that reason, UX becomes less about interfaces and more about kind of innovation, but it can feel quite disruptive because it's a user-driven innovation, because some of the things you have to change rely you to kind of look a bit deeper. So UX is about achieving a balanced state. It's not like a perfect interface. It's more about a kind of balance, a state, really. And that's the goal of CMS, is to balance out what Drupal has in terms of strengths, many of which are listed there, and there are many more, with those expectations of the non-technical user audience. So thinking about what they're expecting and how Drupal can deliver on that. And the process that we tend to use is this one here. There are many UX processes. I find this one it's kind of helpful because it's straightforward, and it's it's a cycle. So you learn, you do some research, you fold that into whatever you're going to build. In this case, CMS. You've then got something that you've built. You can then do some measurement and testing, and then fold those learnings back in. And you're never quite done with that cycle. And this was certainly the case towards getting a good user experience of Drupal CMS. So we had the concept launch, which was in May. We applied this cycle. That got us through to the minimal viable product, which was in September. And then again, after that, there was an opportunity, once we had that MVP, to do, that was kind of a focus on the build. So we had some more opportunity after that to do some measurement, and then through to the go live in January. So I'm going to talk about some of the pieces of work that we've done under each of those categories, and reveal a bit about the techniques and why we work in this way, which will be hopefully useful and might provoke some questions, or thinking about how you might apply these techniques or approaches in your own organizations. So the first one I'm going to talk about is learn, and this is all about understanding the context on a ground level, and also kind of taking that down to really empathize with the target users. So some techniques for understanding the context. It's really helpful. It can be really tempting, to start thinking about personas quite early on, but as Christina and Pam mentioned, it was important with CMS and anything really that you're building new to work out like where it's going to land in the world. So it is really big picture thinking. What's the underlying need? Why are we doing this? What happens if we didn't do this? How would people solve this problem? that we think is here. So that it was important to think about this stuff in advance of CMS. So what are the underlying, the trends, the drivers, the values, the manifestations? How do things work now? What depends on what? Where are the root causes, relationships? That can then help you get to working out how you can find out some more about that. If you start thinking about relationships and dependencies and how things operate now, start thinking who's writing about this, this thing that I'm going to land whatever I'm building into, what data exists already. So for CMS, I was thinking about people tend to want an online presence. That market, typically they want an online presence. Well, why do they want that? Well, because they want to promote something, or they have transactions they want to support, exchanges, there might be a social need. Typically as well, a big trend is digitalization. A lot of things maybe were in physical format and now they need to be online. This is something that happens a lot. So this is kind of setting the scene. What that manifests as in terms of actions, people are then, right, I need to get something online quickly. I need to build something. So they'll go to a self-serve website builder, and this can happen as an organization or it can happen as an individual. And if you don't know about website building, or you've been asked to just put something online or get something out there, you might just put collections of pages together without structure. So that's kind of an action that results from it. And then you get to a point where you're stuck. You then realize that you need a specialist website provider, an agency. So all of these things are happening. Thinking in that way led us to think, okay, well, where can we learn more about the context? So agency case studies, as we talked about, CMS reviews, other products, looking at persona research, understanding those needs. And this led us to think who CMS was for. So the market breakdown, also comparison data, we've already mentioned WordPress. There are other website builders out there that people could opt to use. And that got us to drill down into kind of 3 categories of personas, I guess. The marketer, the designer, stroke creative, stroke builder, and content editor. And I've depicted these as kind of intersected circles because typically they tend to be, we call it like shared hats. So typically it's not necessarily one marketer, one content editor. There might be like a group. And actually what comes out of that is a sort of series of collected jobs to be done or tasks. And that's what got us thinking about archetypes rather than specific people, personas. When you have that information though, this is a technique to learn, like to get on the level. So you're going a level deeper when you have the context. There's no shortcut to really reaching out to these people and hearing what they have to say. It can feel quite affronting, but actually people are very happy to talk about a situation if you ask them to describe what's happening now. One of the traps you can fall into, especially with a new product like Drupal CMS, is asking them, well, would you want this thing, or how would you want this to work? People will typically be really nice and say nice things about whatever you're planning for, but that's not an honest representation. It's much more valid to ask them, tell me about how you create websites now. Tell me about, when you build a website now, how does that happen for you? What works, what doesn't work? When you've got that information, you can pick out behaviors, you can pick out themes, and typically understanding how they sort things when it goes wrong is a really good indicator to work out, well, where's the niche, for example, that Drupal CMS could fill here? So going back to that, well, I create a collection of pages for my website, but then I want to try and structure it in some way, or I want to connect pieces of content together, or I want to achieve an integration. Okay, so how do you do that? Right, well, I'm stuck. Then I have to go somewhere else. So that was occupied, that helped us work out a niche that Drupal CMS could occupy. Role plays, if anybody wants to sign up for my breakout session, I quite like role plays, so just FYI in case, this might come in. But getting into the heads of users, thinking about how they're going to act, presenting a context, and then it doesn't necessarily have to be your target audience, but it just is a useful exercise to think, what would they ask for here? What would they say? How would they behave in this context? How we did this for Drupal CMS is exactly that. Reached out and asked people, tell me about the last website you built. What went wrong for you there? What's your go-to if you need to get something online? And what people were saying kind of in the role play part was, well, and the patterns, well, once I've got a template, that's what I use, because I've gone through the hassle of making a template. I just want to use that again and again. Get so far in, I get stuck. And very typically, especially maybe in the higher education space, and possibly nonprofits too, like this idea of it wasn't me that created this thing. I've inherited a website. I have to look after it. I have to then work out like decisions that I didn't know why they were made or what happened. But you know, that's a blocker for me, and I don't have time. So I just want to add extra things in. They might have like old pages they need to update. They might not know how they've been put together. They need to go and change things like update logos, and typically like a speed thing with a pattern. I need to get this event up to date. We need to registration for conferences. We need to talk about this piece of research. We need to get like impact demonstration to get money in for grants, this kind of thing. So once you have a lot of that data, learnings, the challenge is to turn it into the designs, to make it into a build. And I'm going to talk about two aspects of that. Firstly, like using raw data, raw research data that you have, and how you can then fashion that into designs, but also heuristics, or sometimes called like UX laws. So how we shaped the interfaces based on what we'd learned. Visualization is a crucial skill in UX, so learning about how people do things and visualizing that as a pathway and a flow help to work out how we map out those interfaces that Pam and Christina demonstrated earlier. Drilling down into the tasks, there's a lot of tasks there. That was just some that you can't see, it's too small, apologies. But there were a lot of tasks. These were tasks that we looked at for onboarding, so thinking about how people go from starting with a CMS, like learning how it works, and then learning what they can do with it, and what are the tasks that kind of underpin that. We spent time choosing the words. We did voice and tone workshops, thinking about, well, how does Drupal CMS present itself against other providers and against Drupal core? Like, what kind of language does it need to have, the feel? And then with the style, thinking about what we want it to look like and what the expectations of those target users were, and what's the best parts of Drupal that we can put in front of them to really showcase this. You can't research everything. I wish you could. But the good news is that you don't need to research everything, because some things have already been researched. UX has been around a while. People have been doing work in this field, and so there were some laws of UX that were really critical for us building Drupal CMS, and also generally putting websites together, that are helpful to refer to if you're trying to decide on a design decision. So the first is don't reinvent. So people will spend, sometimes this is called Jacob's Law, which is named after Jacob Nielsen, who's a kind of UX guru. So users they spend 99%, 90% of their time on other systems, sites. They'll expect whatever you're putting out there to work in the same way. So it can seem cool to push the tech sometimes to make novelty interaction patterns, but actually you're giving people more to think about. And that might take away from the content or whatever your call to action is that you want, if they have to try and work out how this menu works or so on. Another heuristic which is important is don't mask complexity. And I think this is critical with Drupal. Some things are complicated because of the way they've been set up. If you try and abstract that and put a layer across, people then don't have the opportunity to understand. So it's better to break it into steps and to convey some understanding, rather than pretend that complexity isn't there. Don't overwhelm. Again, Pam and Christina talked about this, about the choices. So giving people just enough, what they need when they need it to get them through to the next step, and trying to avoid choice overload, because then that's a cognitive load. Sorry, that's a bit of a jargon term, but it just means we as humans, we can only hold so much in our working memory, so you don't want to overload people. How that applied in CMS, benchmarking was a crucial thing. So these aren't competitors necessarily for Drupal CMS, but it's important to understand that when people want to build a website, they could go to these providers. So it's useful for us to know, well, how do they do it? How do they take people through this process? And we broke that down into kind of 23 different types of, I want to say feature, but also it was more like functionality and kind of pathways that we wanted to learn how other providers did it, and think, well, how could we put that into CMS to make sure we're not telling them how to do something differently. In terms of keeping it straightforward, we wanted to give them what they needed to get going as soon as possible. So one of the decisions for the dashboard was having a kind of top task section, thinking about what would be these, and that kind of came from that diagram with lots of different tasks on it in a circle, thinking about what things are people going to be doing all the time when they've got this website, thinking through what it would be like when it's in their hands, giving them just enough to start, thinking about the content model and which content types are going to set them up for publishing. Of course, Drupal has so many options in terms of content types, but we need to just give them enough to get started. Once they've got, we want to instill this feeling of confidence and empowerment from the beginning so that they have enough to start. A step-by-step approach, one of the manifestations of this was, and I'll talk about this a bit in a second, was some research we did on the AI features. And what we learned from that was that kind of thinking about how an AI could assist a person doing a task in Drupal, the AI agents could do the task for them. But actually, when we did research, we found that people wanted to know, well, what are the steps this AI is taking? Because I don't really want to say yes to something I don't know. So that step-by-step approach, and this just shows you a screenshot of one of the outputs of the AI assistant that people quite resonated with to help them learn. Okay, I'm going to come on to more of the research, more recent research now, and talk about how we set that up, how we do research to make sure that we get the best learning from it, and some techniques to get the most useful data. So one of the things when we set out to research something, so we built something, we want to now test, okay, did it work? One of the things it's important to do is to be clear about what you're going to measure from the start. Otherwise, you can watch somebody interact with an interface and be like, okay, was that a good thing? Was that a bad thing? You know, it's important to set things out from the start, because every interaction with somebody, with a target person, a target audience member for Drupal CMS was really valuable to us to learn, well, this is an opportunity to learn and make it better. So we set out predictions, hypotheses. If I see this happening, I'll know this. Also thinking, okay, what am I going to know when I watch this person use this thing? How do I know if it's gone well? How do I know if it's gone badly? And thinking about the data sources that come from it. What else might they talk about while I've got them in the virtual room? Because we tend to do this kind of research on Zoom or on online calls. How else am I going to use this information? So most recently, we tested content creation. This is a crucial thing, as we talked about Drupal CMS being there for content publishers. So we wanted to think, well, okay, we've put this out there, version 1, is it doing this job? Can users initiate the creation of content, and can they then progress that through to publication? We've put in accessibility and SEO tools. We know this is stuff content creators care about. We've put those tools in, but can they use them? Do they get them? Do they understand what they're there for? So first of all, can they recognize them, and then can they actually use them, and will they result in improved content quality? Because that's what we set out to do. We also set to look at the installation process, because this is the kind of first impression piece, right? So when we take people to this, and we use the Acquia trial experience to do this, testing, do people understand what's happening here, what these choices are manifesting into, what these different stages of the process are like? So this is quite new, this research. I haven't written it up yet because I'm here, but I will write it up this week if I get time. But one of the things that we found, and Christina did this research, there are a couple of routes that people can choose to create content, which is great, because this is what we wanted to have there. So people can go to the create menu, they can go to the content on the left-hand side, and they can, of course, go to the top tasks. And what we saw was people using all three. With the accessibility tools and the SEO tools, we have positives and negatives. They missed what they were for. So the accessibility indicators, they saw the yellow icons, but they weren't quite sure. So, but with prompting, they were really sold on that. So one person said they liked that they could fix when it showed the heading hierarchy was incorrect. They got how they could then very quickly change that. So that was, and they liked the fact that usually they would have had to go to another tool to fix that, but this enabled them to do it right there and then, so that they could be clear that the accessibility was improved. The SEO was an interesting one. When they noticed the tool, there was one of the things that came out was people weren't that clear about how to do SEO well. So this is a challenge, I guess, because you can put a tool in front of somebody, but if their level of understanding wasn't, they weren't quite sure how to use it to get the best result, then, that's maybe, we need to think about that a bit more. And perhaps like research, and obviously more research is needed with these kind of things. So somebody was unclear, is this back-end metadata, or what's this actually doing? So maybe SEO isn't as well understood as a concept as maybe we once thought it was. For the installation test, this work, again, really positive results from this sort of first in. People understood that when they got started, and they went through and they chose those. They were like, okay, so this is me building my site. This is me setting it up for what I want to publish. Because typically they'd be approaching this thinking, I want a site to publicize my event. I want a site to achieve something. So that got them thinking, okay, well, what kind of pages am I going to publish? What's my content going to look like? So that decision point worked well. When it came to the progress bar, though, taking that through, they were seeing... this takes you through a kind of a series of stages where it tells you everything that's been installed. And they were thinking, okay, coffee module. I don't remember picking coffee module. So, it's a small thing, but it's maybe we put that in there, but it's maybe without the intention of it confusing people, but it's maybe something to think about. It needs to be clearer aligned to that journey because they are paying attention at that stage. One of the really interesting pieces of research we did, and this was kind of setting up for the future, I guess. So in December, we looked at AI, and AI, it's there, right? It's everywhere. I feel like we maybe have a FOMO strategy for AI at my organization. Like we know we need to do it, but we're not quite sure why, but everybody else is doing it. So, we have to do it. And one of the things with AI assistance was, we maybe saw the demo in Barcelona, and we saw how that AI assistant could help somebody in the context, but I was really keen to test this with real people and think, well, will content creators in this space, is this going to be annoying to them, or are they actually going to find this useful and usable? So I sat out and did some tests working with Jamie and the Freely Give team to set this up, and setting out those indicators. So if they can engage in dialogue with the AI assistant with a natural language query, that's a good indication. If they can then make some sense of what the AI assistant gives them back, again, positive or negative. And there was a lot of data to come from this because there was the recordings, the interaction patterns of where people were clicking on the screen. There was also the transcripts of what they were saying as they were doing it, because we got them to think aloud and tell us what they thought. And there was also the information from the logs and the responses in the back end as well to see how the AI was making sense of the queries to give data back. Bit of a demonstration of that. So yeah, we had the front end, the chat bot-like interface, so the queries that they were typing in and the responses that the chatbot was talking out. What was nice for me is a lot of my job is spent watching people struggle with interfaces. With this research, it was really nice to have some positive comments that people responded positively to these chatbots, and they actually were quite pleased that the chatbot could offer to do tasks for them. Yeah, so this comment reflects that. They thought it would just be a help tool. They hadn't thought it would be a do tool, because in the test we included the option in the AI response to complete the task for the person, which was really positively received. And yeah, the back-end logs, there was a lot of information there too. I'm going to talk about the AI a little bit in a second, but just to kind of, again, talk a bit more about the techniques that we use. Some of the things that we needed to bear in mind when testing with users is not to drive them in any way, to let them act completely freely. It's the system that's being tested and not them, and that they can't do anything wrong. I am terrible at interrupting people in usability tests. I have to sort of like zip my mouth when I'm doing it, but it's really important to like let them act freely, and if you see them do something and you're not sure why they did it, then let them do it and then like circle back to it afterwards to not interrupt that action. Expect the unexpected. Every usability test I've done, and I've done a lot, they can go off course. There's something unexpected. And I used to panic a lot if it doesn't go according to plan, if there's errors, but actually that's a really valuable source of getting into people's heads, because how they seek to solve those errors tells you about how they're thinking. and get used to silences again. It comes with time, but it's helpful to just let them think about these things. So linking that into the AI assistant tests, I didn't want to ask them to use the chatbot to do this thing, so I got them to think, imagine you had somebody next to you who you thought would be able to help you with your task, and you want to ask them how to do it, and then could you type that into the chatbot interface. One of the things I watched, they were trying to kind of clicking the cursor on the chatbot and trying to click on something, and I couldn't work out why they were doing that. So afterwards I said, do you mind, I noticed that you were clicking on this, and actually they were trying to move the chatbot out of the way in the interface. So that was something to learn about. They wanted to see the interface, and the chatbot was obscuring it, excuse me. The AI, when we thought about the instructions, as I talked about a little bit before, with the kind of breaking down the steps that people would use to complete tasks, the AI, through iteration, we thought, well, okay, the AI needs to offer people a choice. It can either you ask the AI assistant to do something, like, I want to add pictures into this content type. The AI can either say, okay, here are the instructions how to do that, or, okay, I take your request, you want me to just do that for you? And we said, well, there needs to be another step then, that the AI responds to the query and says, would you want the instructions, or would you want me to just do it for you? And then somebody in the usability test said both. And so that was like, it was that unexpected thing, but actually they didn't want both. They, in thinking about it, the AI dealt with it pretty well. But yeah, an example of where the unexpected can sometimes, we as humans are not perfect, so, there'll be experiment with whatever tech you put out in the world. When the AI glitched, which it does, and things like all technology glitches, right? It was insightful to then watch the person open up another tab and type in the query. And actually, the Google tab that they opened up gave them pretty much the same response as the AI would have done, because it came through Gemini, the AI generator from Google. So that was insightful too. Yeah, and like waiting for people to type and read was worth it, because actually what was like quite nice for me to see was that this was helping them learn how to use Drupal in real time, because they were processing the information they were seeing from the output and going, okay, right, oh, I didn't realize that I would have to go there. I didn't realize that was in structure, or I didn't realize that was in configuration. So yeah, that was a really valuable experience. So what's next? Well, loads more, right? Loads more research to learn. Now we have version 1 out there. We need to break down a lot more areas. So content creation, we've started researching this. We're not done with it. We realize this is a really important part. From the tests that we've kind of previewed just now, we've learned stuff, but that means we need to do more testing and more research, and to kind of make some changes and see if they work. Onboarding as well, it's crucial. It's first impressions, so that's going to have some more attention too. We're also starting to, I haven't previewed this here, but very recently we did some tests looking at how people expect to add functionality in their site. So this is kind of beyond the, I've published stuff, now what do I want to extend my site, I want to add extra things in. So we're trying not to use the word extend. This is not that we're trying to avoid using that, but not to put that into users' heads so that then they just look at the interface and see extend. We're trying to understand what brings them to growing their site, making their site do more complicated things, adding things in to make sure that the interface can support them with that, and then working out where recipes fits into that, where modules fits into that, how do we make sure that they can tap into that Drupal functionality. And migration is another part, thinking ahead to the kind of the experience builder situation, and thinking, what naturally people will want to do will be to move to experience builder over time if it's right for them. So how can we make sure that user experience of migration, maybe this is quite personal to my heart, but I think that this is a crucial part of site looking after, and sites grow and they evolve, and it's important to understand what people expect around that, so that we're kind of ahead of the curve on that. Yeah, so this is a kind of plea. We really want to research with people who are using CMS and Drupal to understand like what we're building into it. Is it right? How can we make it better? So we're always looking for people to interview, to give feedback on concepts, which might not necessarily be built into code, but just like visuals of things. And then to also test interfaces to carry out tasks on those. We're also looking for more people, if you're interested in doing UX or UI, we now have a contributor role set up on Drupal.org for people to contribute this. So if you or anybody you work with might be interested in getting involved and having a kind of hand in shaping Drupal to be more user-centered, it's really worthy cause. I can recommend it, but there's now a role for that, and there's more instructions about how to get involved. And yeah, we also have the Slack channel, the Drupal CMS, UX marketing Slack channel. Get in touch with either myself and Christina if you would like to volunteer people to test, and also if you're interested in getting involved too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for questions. Anybody has them?
Okay, everyone's stunned.
Emma will also be leading a breakout table in the next time slot. So
Yeah, I think I'll ask one question here, which is partly the subject of your breakout, I think. But the scope of the UX work that's going into Drupal CMS is large. It's a very significant effort and a heavy effort. And I know there's a lot of people sitting in this room, including myself, who has, at the Drupal Association, who has no UX person on staff,
Yep.
who's like, I want to learn from this for our own things, but how do I put it into practice inside of a small team or a scrappy team in a nonprofit context?
So this is close to my heart because this is my my role at the university, and it is really about you apply it where it's going to be useful for you. So it's not about reading all the UX textbooks and learning all the techniques. It's really about thinking. There's a couple of techniques that you can use, just design decision making. So if you have an interface and you're thinking of like making a decision around it, there are a couple of techniques to get you to think in a user mindset to help guide those decisions. And to me, that is what UX is. So it occurs a kind of a grassroots level. It doesn't necessarily have to be, obviously if it can be a fully fledged outfit where you have a dedicated UX, so that's amazing. But some UX is better than no UX, and there are some techniques that I'd love to share in my breakout session. And I kind of talked a little bit about them there, but yeah, I think there's a lot that people can do, and to not be afraid of not necessarily being trained in UX or so on. There's stuff that everybody can learn just by watching people use stuff. You can learn things and pull that in.
You talked about the admin AI, the Drupal agent. Is that a ready module already, or is it something that we're working on?
So
And is it trainable?
the question was about the Drupal AI agents. It is that you can get them in as a module. It's not, and it is available. I'm not the most technical person when it comes to AI to set it up. So you have to have access to an LLM, and then that incurs a cost for the tokens to use it. So there is work going on to try and open that up to be able to demonstrate it, to actually see how it can work and how you can learn from it before you then take the steps to. There's the AI sessions that Pam and Christina mentioned earlier. One of those, I think the one that Marcus is leading is going to talk about that, or it might be the one that Jamie's leading. But yeah, so there's a recognition that for AI to work, people need to understand what's involved to set it up and making decisions of if it's right for your organization, and then what is involved with that. So there's going to be demo sites available, I believe. I could be talking out of term, but from what I understand, that's going to be available, so that there's a way to road test these to make the decision about that, because there are a lot of, I would say AI it's an experimental field, so it's worth being like in the know about where it could go wrong and what are the risks and what are the ethical concerns and so on before making a decision. And that was part of the reason motivating the research that we did with the assistants to think, before we launch this, for example, at our the Drupal instance that we use, before we get excited about this, let's just test and see if it's actually going to be useful, and then we can think, how do we make it happen, and if we have the resource to do that, and so on. It's like any technical decision, you have to make, weigh up all the factors.
I'll add a little bit to it as well. So if you were to start a Drupal CMS like online trial today, or download it and launch it, or any of those things, what you'll see when you go to configure the AI features is that you have an option of some of the large providers that are out there, right? The large LLMs that you know. And you can select between them to say, we want to work with this or that, especially in case you might already be working with one in some other context. And many of those do offer some free credits and things like that, so that is something you can do now. But yes, I know there's an effort underway to create to somehow kind of automatically ship some credits with the demo experience so people can actually try that out. So it's still a work in progress. Those AI sessions will definitely talk about it more. And I wanted to pause for a second, if I can interrupt some of the question time, to speak to Drupal and more broadly the open source community's approach to AI. So there was another post about how we're approaching the ethics of the use of AI, and it focuses on a couple principles. One is a human-centric approach to AI use, where we always want to have a human in the loop, right? The idea is that anything that you are doing with that, you are confirming in what parts of your data you're allowing access, you're confirming the actions that are going to be undertaken by the AI, you're confirming which provider you're using, all of these things, and trying to ensure that that's your choice and that you can adapt it and extend it in an open source way. And that, again, will get talked about, I'm sure, during these other sessions. Provider choice was one of those other basic principles. We are not choosing to say we're going to throw our weight behind OpenAI or Gemini or anything like that. First of all, that feels wildly premature. But also, the use cases are going to be wild. And then lastly, just kind of transparency, right? We want sort of auditability of what's been going on, and also auditability of our decision making. And then we are exploring, and this is in no way a promise, but I know there are some community folks who are currently organizing around the idea of there are some specific models being built that avoid controversies like the LibGen controversy with the Meta AI model, where they literally used a piracy database to help train their model on literature, and explicitly. So all of these kinds of things where, for regulatory reasons, depending on your own use cases, you may not want to risk certain things. And so there are people looking at identifying large language models and RAGs and all these other kinds of things that help you scope to something that fits within the values of your organization. So there'll be more of that. It's really early. But another way to put, I know within University of Edinburgh, you're saying that sort of the FOMO approach to AI. Yeah. I would say within the Drupal community, the approach is we can either be a part of shaping what the kind of ethics and best practices are, or we can let it happen to us and see what that means. So.
And I will also note that one of our breakout sessions after lunch will be on AI. So if you want to talk more about AI today, that will be an opportunity.
Yeah. But do we have any more questions in general about UX or user testing?
This isn't specifically about the Drupal CMS, but you mentioned the Drupalisms
Yep.
project. Is this a supported goal of the Drupal community to make Drupal make sense to regular people? Because that's great.
Okay, so the question was about Drupalisms and it's not even a project, or it's still an issue, so it's quite fledgling. It's, I think there is a desire to make Drupal wording, terminology more consistent and more open. The challenge is something I kind of alluded to a little bit before, is that these words haven't just been chosen, for fun. There are reasons behind every word that's in an interface, and so the temptation, again, it's like a bit like the interface thing. The temptation is, oh, that's confusing, let's get rid of it and replace it with something else. But you want to do that in a very methodical way to make sure that you don't create extra confusion. So we have adopted a 6-stage approach, the first of which was identifying what words are out there. We're still not done with that. That is a huge spreadsheet that we have with that, and so it's kind of it's been on pause a little bit for this month, partly because of me and my diary and stuff. But the other stage of work that we some of you may have contributed to a quiz that we had about concepts in Drupal, which we circulated last year. We had 418 responses, which illustrated some of the concepts that are the most confusing for people. So we are still, I guess, at the gathering data stage of what the current state is with the terminology, and there is a real excitement about what happens next, how we simplify things, but a long way of saying we're not there yet. But the issue is still alive, and we do have bi-weekly calls about it, which will resume in April to continue working on it, but it's not going to be a quick, and rightly so. We don't want to make changes to terminology without properly thinking them through. So that's the kind of approach we're going, which I think is frustrating for some people in the community that want to see improvement quicker, but it's important to do it in a measured way, I think. Hopefully that answers your question. Hi. Sorry, I can't hear you, sorry. Okay, so the question was about the AI assistant testing and some of the issues that came up with testing it. So one of the things, actually relating similar to the Drupalism's side of things, what the tests were about, we gave people a scenario and said, you manage a website and you want to be able to, we gave them a simple scenario, which was a book publishing website. And so then we could hang some tasks off of that. And we said, okay, the first task is you want to be able to add images into your book reviews. How would you do that? So they just typed in, how do I add images to my book reviews? So the AI had to work out, okay, this is a content type field change, and then had to communicate that to the person, how they would do that. One of the things that came out was, wow, that's a lot of steps to achieve something that I can type in a sentence. But that's how Drupal works. The complexity's there. So that was, that was one point of learning. The other thing we did multiple rounds of this testing because AI is very experimental and it can be unpredictable and unreliable. And that's one of the reasons I personally think we need to do more testing to keep learning where it does well and where it doesn't do so well. So one of the things the AI would go, okay, I can do that for you, and it would just do it. And what the response was from users was, well, wait, I don't want, and as Tim was saying, to keep the human in the loop, the human needs to, I want to make the control. I want to be in control of what you change on my site. Tell me what you're doing. So that was something that we then folded in, that decision point, if somebody wants to have the instructions to do it themselves or whether they want the AI to do it. And if they chose that the AI was going to do it for them, it would then tell them what it had done so they could check and still be in control of any changes that it made to their site. It glitched occasionally for some reasons that we don't really understand, but that, that's kind of how it will work and how it does work in everyday life. So that was important to understand. Well, where does somebody go? We wouldn't want to install that in a site and then leave somebody powerless. Okay, I can't get out of this problem. That's when we saw what people actually did when they didn't know how to use something in Drupal, which is try and find documentation about it, open another tab. And what was interesting from that was seeing how much time that took them to, they Google, how do I do this, that conversational type query into Google. There was so much information. There were so many ways to do it. They were like, oh, I don't know which one to pick. And so that was interesting to see, there was a lot that we learned about that, I guess, which wasn't necessarily so much about AI, but just how people expect to use Drupal. And yeah, sorry, I wrote 4 blog posts about this. I can recommend if anybody's struggling to sleep, those blog posts. Boy, there is like thousands of words. Christina was like, how many words? And I was like, I don't know. There was just so much stuff that came out of it. So we learned a lot. We learned a lot about what AI can do and a lot about what people expect to happen, whether AI is there or not. So yeah, and I'm keen to continue working to learn what new developments are happening in AI. For me, AI can only help if it's solving a need that is there already, right? Everything's new and cool, but does it help somebody? Does it make things more complicated? That's important to know. So yeah, more to come.
I think we can do one more question, and next time just have AI read those posts for you. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see here.
After Tim, we can take a break.
Yeah.
What time is lunch?
After the next thing after me, I think. You can go do that. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. All right, I think if anybody needs to escape for a bathroom break, you're welcome to do that. We got a couple extra minutes here. My section will only be 15 minutes, and then we'll have a more formal break. But we'll give it a minute or two because I'm seeing some antsy folks in seats. So go ahead and check those messages that you're desperately trying to stop looking at. Then turn off those ringers. But yeah, take your time. I'll get started in just a minute. Yeah, I figured. People need the bathroom. I'll give it 60 seconds as some folks trickle back in. It'll be all right if a few folks are coming in late, but. That'll be good. All right, I'm going to dive into this because then we'll go ahead and get into a bigger break afterwards. So this will be about 15 minutes. Then you'll get a 15-minute break, one last little session, and then lunch. So we're going to make it quick. And I'm going to probably wake you up a little bit, hopefully in a good way. So on the schedule, you will have seen nuances for your organization or nuances about Drupal to bring back to your organization. And this was a little bit camouflage. And I'm currently giving a heart attack to my organizers, because I'm going to talk about some elephants in the room, some things that are all making us uncomfortable in the world and that heavily affect the nonprofit sector. And I'm going to talk about values alignment and open source, and how that should be part of the conversation about your technology decisions.
No heart attacks here, go for it.
So who am I? I'm Tim Lennon, the CTO of the Drupal Association. Thank you. I'm now blushing. I'm Hestenet on Drupal.org, so if you've ever read some of the technical blog posts coming out of the Drupal Association, you have definitely heard from me before, or if you've been at any of the last 20 DrupalCons, you've probably seen me. So the Drupal Association is the organization putting on this event. You would be surprised how many people don't realize that. So we put on DrupalCon, we support the community, we fund Drupal.org, the packaging infrastructure, the collaboration tools. We create DrupalCon, we work with local communities all over the world. We have a staff of only 18 folks who are globally distributed, and we serve the global community. This is going to be a roller coaster conversation. I know that a lot of folks were probably trying to get a break from the news outside, and I'm going to shatter that slightly, and then I'm going to attempt to recover the mood. But I think just a little bit of rage might wake us up at this point in the day. So, all right, this is going to be short, like I said, so you won't have to grit your teeth for too long. But I'll start off with who owns the public square. And right, definitionally, if it is the public square, we should own it. Nominally, there are still free spaces for free speech and public speech and for outreach and all of those things. But practically speaking, the internet was not exactly constructed with true public commons, right? Yes, anybody could publish anything to it. Is that space a shared space that anybody can participate in? Not necessarily. And practically speaking, who actually owns the public square has a lot to do with who's making big donations to political parties, to presidential candidates, to regulatory lobbyists, and all of these things that many of you know, especially if you're in a legal advocacy nonprofit, has been basically entirely deregulated here in the United States. And there's a big threat to the concept of the public square and the concept of digital sovereignty, and the concept of nonprofits owning their own words, owning their own platform, and owning their ability to act. As a brief anecdote, right? Many of you will probably remember the transition point that happened when Facebook took Facebook pages or groups, I forget which it was called at the time, that you could set up for your organization. Everybody would, join your group, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. I don't have to have a website. And all of my constituents are here, and every time I post something, they see it. And, oh, wait a minute, what's that boost button that's suddenly showing up on all my posts? Like, right? We were given frankly, a decoy of a wonderful tool for connecting and networking with our community, and then that community was captured by a for-profit organization, hidden from us, and we were charged to communicate with them, even when they explicitly chose to subscribe to our communication channels, right? You have now seen headlines like this. We're doing presidential car commercials. We're talking about defending the free market and personal liberties. Interesting. We have, even on the conservative side of media, these influence watch things that, whether or not you believe what they're saying, are talking about things like, in recent decades, the reputation has been eroded by increasing amounts of left-leaning bias and advocacy. This is not a problem that any side of the political spectrum is pretending doesn't exist, but there's stark disagreement. So this is the actual roller coaster that we're on. It's not the fun one that I started the presentation with. It's the terror clown roller coaster. And we've been having a collective series of heart attacks every day since maybe January 20th or long before that. I'm going to go back in time a little bit and talk about some of the factors that affect the web specifically, and that affect, again, the concept of digital sovereignty, the concept of owning our own platforms. And it isn't really my intention to shove a specific political message in anyone's face, because I still do think that the fundamental principles of the public square and of owning your words apply to everyone. In 2023, would anyone like to guess what the American Dialect Society's word of the year was? Not doom scrolling is a wonderful guess. Not 2023. Not an emoji, although another excellent guess. This was also the 2023 word of the year of an Australian major dialect society too. Slightly spicy, but I'm gonna say it on mic. Enshittification. Enshittification is a word that was coined by Cory Doctorow, who you may know is a massive advocate for, well, for all sorts of things, but mostly for, I would say, collective or rather free and open source principles when it comes to technology, freedom of platform and speech when it comes to public spaces, commenter on technology, author of science fiction, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, that's going to be my profile pic. That's going right on my LinkedIn. So if you want the background on this, it was first coined in 2022, again by Cory Doctorow on his blog Pluralistic, which talked about how monopoly enshittified Amazon, right? And that's an interesting way to phrase what was responsible for the issue, or to maybe decide who's responsible for that. But the fundamental idea was that once they had achieved monopoly, there was no longer incentive for Amazon to provide the benefits that they had used to capture the market. Once the market is captured, they can then progressively extract more and more value. As soon as you run out of room for growth, you have no other option than to begin to extract value, right? So this is when enshittification was first coined. And I'm going to actually pretty much read most of this. This is from a later article applying to TikTok next. He says, here is how platforms die. First, they are good to their users. Then they abuse their users to make things better for their business customers. Finally, they abuse those business customers to claw back all the value for themselves. Then they die. Hold that last sentence because I'm going to come back to it. I call this enshittification, and it is a seemingly inevitable consequence arising from the combination of the ease of changing how a platform allocates value, combined with the nature of a two-sided market where the platform sits between the buyers and sellers and can hold hostage each to the other, raking an ever larger share of the value that passes between them, right? And one of the problems we face as nonprofits, as open source projects, as citizens, is we have increasing numbers of mediators between us and the platforms, the constituencies, everything that we're trying to reach. We are always at one step of remove, unless we proactively find ways to do that, right? That might be because your only way to reach your audience is through social media, and that might still be true. I'm not saying that just because it's true, it means you can't be there, but this is a consistent problem. Now, to go slightly, let's go back on the uphill on this roller coaster for a moment. There's a variety of folks who have talked about what is the countervailing trend. Things like Mastodon, this notion of an open social web, the Fediverse, the idea that we begin to federate and decentralize technology on the web in order to break monopolistic control of public squares. And those can be market squares, commerce related, they can be political, they can be, again, just access to constituencies, all of these things, right? And there was a lot of optimism about this idea. There's a lot of us who did go to Mastodon. There's a lot of people going to Blue Sky. There's a lot of these sorts of things. And that's awesome. However, actually, let me keep going, right? There's another fun phrase. I don't think it's going to get word of the year, but Twitter quitter, right? We're up to about 32 million people using Blue Sky, and that grew by like 10 million a month in 3 months, right? It grew incredibly quickly, and you look at that and you go, oh, it's working, we're going to escape, it's awesome. And then I started looking up, okay, let me get the relative market share of Blue Sky to the other social media companies for my slides. And okay, Facebook, 67%, okay, Instagram, 10, Pinterest, 8, Reddit, 1.2, oh, it doesn't seem to be there, Blue Sky's market share is 0.12%. Despite all the recent positive media. Now that 0.12% is a lot of folks in open source, a lot of folks in policy and advocacy, a lot of folks who have a motivated reason to opt out of these other places. But so far, It has not yet broken out of that monopolistic control of the social media public square, right? They've awarded $10,000 in grants to development projects. That's much less money than even these big monopolistic companies give as a fig leaf to participating in their communities, right? Raised a total of $21 million in funding. Okay, again, rounding errors to the quarterly profits of these other organizations, right? So I'm getting depressing again. I promise it's going to swing back around. But there's also this, right? We had this Schadenfreude moment where as soon as Twitter was purchased, it was like, oh, the share price crashed. Everybody, yes, there's consequences. And I was like, cool, I'm going to go and look at how far it's fallen since then. And then I found that headline, where it's actually back to what it was at the original purchase price. And so you remember that sentence in Cory Doctorow's explanation where he says, that's when platforms die. And I was like, cool, well, if they can't keep enshittifying it, they're going to die. And now I'm getting nervous because it's been happening and it hasn't died. So how do we get off this ride? I want to get off this roller coaster. What are we going to do about it? So I want to speak in terms of the Open Web Manifesto because it is a specific publication made by the Drupal Association, largely drafted by myself, also Dries, the founder, and others, and it's based on long-standing principles in open source. The original, if you want to go into the history, if you search the 4 freedoms of open source, that's an original foundational document about what open source is and what it means, and this derives from that, right? So these are principles that we came up with as a project to state our commitment to what the vision of the web should be, in other words, what the vision of a digital public square should be, and what the values we need to apply to that digital experience need to be. And I'm sharing them here not because all of you run open source software projects, but because in the context of running nonprofit organizations, you are heavily impacted by this mediation and segregation of public squares, the private control of public squares, and all of these things. And also because increasingly I am realizing that we cannot wait for someone to save us from this situation, right? We cannot wait. It literally comes down to individual decisions and individual actions, or else we're just asking for the next monopoly to disrupt and assert some proprietary control over the web and over what should be a public space. So I'll read these in full, even though they're also on the slides. I know that's a no-no, but the open web is built on freedom. You don't need permission to learn, build, or advance open web technology. Anyone, anywhere can contribute to make it better. This is our first principle. Each of these are again, value statements. They're things we are asserting to be true, but that also need to be defended and supported, right? It is defined by decentralization. No single person or entity should control the open web. And again, arguably, there is de facto single entity control of large parts of the current web, which means that in order to achieve this, we have to figure out how to break some of these patterns. It thrives on inclusion. Everyone in the world, regardless of background, identity, ability, wealth, or status, has a home on the open web as a user, creator, architect, and innovator. Diversity is fundamental to creating this open web. It requires participation. This is one of these points that I alluded to just a second ago. The open web is a shared resource and a shared responsibility, sustained by a deliberate choice and a collaborative effort. Again, it will not happen in a vacuum. It will not happen without your help. It will not happen without our particular efforts to make it happen. And finally, it exists for empowerment. The open web itself is fueled by humanity's collective quest for information, connection, and progress, and strengthened by every individual's right to choice, privacy, and security. So this is not the whole of the manifesto, but we do sort of sum it up in saying to live up to the definition, the open web must not be built on proprietary technology. So if you would like to read the rest, it has been adopted more broadly by the Open Web Alliance, which is made up of Drupal, Typo3, WordPress, Joomla, and a variety of other organizations are in the process of joining. They saw us publish it and they said, hey, let's come together and assert this as well. And what I would like to leave you with after this depressing, very short roller coaster that leads us into our break is just that I hope that as you hear all of these technical pieces, as you hear the technical sessions, as you interact with your peers, you are also saying how can the technology align with our values and how can the technology build an environment in which you are choosing your reach in the public square, in which you own your platform, in which you own your words, in which you own the relationship with your constituents as nonprofits. So thank you for your time. And now we're at the official break time, so everybody has 15 minutes? Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.